And g'day, welcome to Lunchtime with People Purpose Place. We've got the dynamic duo this week, Darren and Rowan. How you travelling, Darren?
Yeah, good. It's good to be back, and it's been a couple of weeks, which sometimes is good to have a bit of a break, but also after seeing some of those other videos chopped up into bits, it also gives you some drive to want to keep doing the process, because obviously while these go on for an hour and there might only be 2 1-minute stints that mean anything, they're still pretty poignant moments, and we've seen some of those by having a look back at some of our guests, and hopefully we get some other guests coming up again soon. So it's good to be back.
Yeah, definitely. You've got a stream of people lining up to have a chat, and obviously that has to work with their schedule as well. So for some reason, people on Monday morning lunchtime are sort of, maybe got things on. So some of those might end up being pre-recorded.
Yes.
Awesome. And to model our good work, Christine is unable to be with us today, so it's just the two of us.
Yep.
But this week we are modeling our check-in question.
Yes.
So Darren, you want to ask the question for today? We're both doing something in the background.
Yeah, so we're both sort of starting or restarting or kickstarting or whatever health kicks, and I was just interested to see one, how that's going, and secondly, one thing that you would say is been helping.
Yeah, interesting. For me, it's really quite simple to have someone else doing it. So whether you line up with someone at gym, or in this case, my partner's doing the same sort of routine, so we can egg each other on and encourage each other. So I think misery likes company. I mean, no. That's not it.
That's not it. But so you're saying though, having someone else doing it with you is definitely an advantage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. For me, I find, and I think this has been consistent through all of my life, just in isolation, asking my willpower to do this good behavior is really challenging. I might do it for a day, 2 days, a week, maybe a month.
Yeah.
But to actually do something ongoing is much easier if you're part of a group, or you've got a collaborator with you.
And have you got a goal in mind, or is that just a change in the direction and go with the 75 hard and see where it takes me? Or have you got a goal, you think?
I do actually have a goal. So some of that is it's not really so much about the weight, although I'm carrying, I'd like to redistribute it, some of it away from my stomach. But so it's not really a weight number, but it's just feeling a bit more physically active and healthy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And how about yourself? You've set yourself a health challenge?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I have, certainly, I've had some good success in the start of the year and moved to the biggest part of the mountain, and then sort of finding that adjusting back to just floating along is actually quite challenging. And then I actually feel quite comfortable with the fact that, humans have gone through feast and famine stuff quite a bit. So I think I've reconciled myself to the fact that I'm quite comfortable with the idea of, going, being on a path to somewhere and then not really caring once I'm off that path. So as long as I'm within a range, and then if I find that range is getting to the point, well, then I probably need to reapply the thinking. So this time I've gone back again to start, and I now that I've done fasting a bit, I'll start off with the fast, because it sort of really is that, you really know that you're going somewhere when you're not eating for 3 days or whatever. And I have found it, I mentioned to you that I found it a bit harder to get to the starting block this time. But the one thing that is actually helping me is definitely I had a bit more of a realization that I need to be more present. And I think maybe that, now that I think about it, the reason for the success last time was not necessarily wholly to be put down to food and exercise. It was being present with what I was going to do. So that makes you just that little tiny bit more aware when you walk past the kitchen and you have a reaction to food, or someone's cooking something, yeah, that smells nice. You just have enough, you can catch that moment and go, what are we doing this for, or where are we going to, or whatever. So yeah, I have found that, and maybe next time we'll catch up, we'll find out whether we've been successful in that week or not, or it's all the wagons just completely come off, the wheels have come off it, and
every now and then. And I guess part of that is to be human and to occasionally fall off the wagon. That one binge, a Christmas feast, or a overindulgence every now and then is probably not the end of the world. But
I think I think you're right. That acknowledgement also, what we're doing here is really about humanizing stories, right? So we want to turn it, give people tools. And I think that even an acknowledgement that, hey, you're not going to be this disciplined, perfect thing all the time. The wheels are going to fall off. You might be, cranky because you haven't eaten for a couple of days or whatever. And that might, you just got to pick up your bags after that and then figure out what exactly you do with it. So
own that baggage and move forward with it.
Yep, absolutely.
Very cool. The intention for today, we sort of hit a bit of a milestone in the last little while where the construction starts. So is that sort of the intention to bring everyone up to speed today?
Yeah, I think so. I think between both physical projects as well as us continuing to learn a lot from what we're doing, that it's worth sometimes just catching up to say to people, hey, by the way, we've got this, we've learned some new tools, we've got a project going, we've got some projects embryonically or whatever might be the case. It's worth communicating to everyone, because there's obviously I suppose we have a lot of talking in the space. It's also good to have a bit of action. So even if they're not, because one of the things is there's a lot of people who say, oh yeah, I've been thinking about this for years, but although we have been soldiering away in the background, and I think it's good to talk about some of those things that are actually happening. So both projects as well as advancement of the concepts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's pretty important. I am spending less time on the social medias. It can be, drag you down a rabbit burrow. But
yes.
I do see lots of rinse and repeat of the same headlines. So did you know that in California they're doing this thing with granny flats in the backyard? And I'm going, well, that's just so not helpful, relevant, or action here in the immediate here and now in Australia. It might as well be on Mars. The conditions, the background conditions for housing market. In America, you can have a 30-year fixed mortgage. We can't have a 30-year fixed interest mortgage in Australia. The mechanisms in the background are just so vastly different. So drawing a headline from an isolated United States example is not helping us. We need to talk the story relevant to our background, to our conditions, and then walk the walk. And I think that's the important part. So bringing people up to speed is talking about a house and a physical thing and the bits and pieces, but also talking about us individually and our journey, both individually and as a group, how we're progressing or not progressing, as the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense.
So getting up to date, we've got a project rolling in the beautiful idyllic community of Malanda. Darren, did you want to give us an update of what's happening? Oh, sorry, you want to talk about the project in particular?
Yeah, well, maybe, obviously you might be able to talk to the actual application process, but the milestone is that we've got through the conversations with the builder, and we've signed some contracts, and the project is technically rolling, which is a massive milestone to go through the feasibilities, try and find ways that all that makes sense, and then also to actually have it starting, which is enormously a massive milestone, and we probably haven't really celebrated that for what it is, but because it's obviously the next thing. But it's also been great to have a conversation with the builder rather than talking about the whole collaborative approach go to right the way across. Just that's been awesome. And now we're in the process of jumping through the compliance hoops so that we're, technically can start on site. So from your point of view, I know you're involved in that part of the process. What's sort of happening with that?
Yeah, I guess this is a really common one that consumers think, I've signed a contract. Where's the thing coming out of the ground? That's entirely not how it works. The first step is the bureaucratic, and it's necessary and etc. But there's a whole bunch of compliance has to be done. So we're just ticking those boxes through at the moment. You need the first thing first. We need a builder and a builder contract, and then we need deposits and insurances and stamped plans. Stamped plans is a term that may not be familiar to people outside of the construction space. But in essence, that's saying that these set of construction drawings are deemed to be fit, compliant, and able to be built. So you can have the most beautiful drawing of whatever you like until it's been given the seal of approval by your local authority. In most cases, that's a local council, and you have a stamped set of plans. Then we're whistling Dixie. So we have to get through that phase, which is the first step.
Absolutely. And that's and one of the things that Michael in particular has been very cognizant of is the fact that it does need to be compliant. We do need to tick off all the boxes. We do need to go through that that process of making sure it's done correctly and it's compliant and all that sort of stuff. And then then we've got the next steps from there. So ultimately, once we get it through the council process, which we're hoping, maybe we're a couple of steps closer this week to complying with all the little bits and pieces they need. That's important because there's also some flood level issues that we just have to make sure we're above those things. Then the idea is that we'll have a building set out, then start the pad preparation so that the builder can then start on site. So the council processes around Australia vary, but, private certification and those sorts of things certainly mean that, that process can probably be, 2 to 4 weeks or something like that. And then you have the ability to start on site, which, pad preparation and then a normal build construction time is starting to return to some level of normality. So once upon a time, 6 to 8 months felt like an achievable thing. Then it sort of blew out to 2 years, and now it's sort of coming back below a year. So, and that's where I hope we can get some scheduling done and those sorts of things to make sure we can be as efficient as we can there. But that's very exciting. So, and there's probably some conversation there around particularly the type of project in the area. I know one thing that we've been discussing a little bit of recent is this, which also crosses over a little bit into some other conversation that might happen further on in this chat today, but this whole idea of making sure that people are comfortable with that sort of development in that area. And there's been a lot in the media of recent, everyone's saying, hey, we need all these more social housing, and then they go, I noticed in Townsville there's been a couple of projects open, and then instantaneously goes, well, I don't want any of that in my backyard. And I don't know where the acronym come from, but I think I've seen you share around that, not in my backyard, NIMBY or whatever the statement is being. So that's one thing we will have to make sure of with Ginn Road to make sure that everyone is familiar with it. So,
and I guess that's the purpose of, it's not a construction of a thing. It's actually a home that's in part of a community. So there's a very big difference to a home with a group of people who fit into a community. That's all relationship and understanding where we fit in the scheme of things, rather than just the bricks and mortar. Because there will always be a place for investor builds of bricks and mortar around the country, but it doesn't serve everybody.
Yeah. And I think we looked at this idea of also making sure that we can move even from not in my backyard to we jokingly called it "fuck yes" in my backyard.
Or hell
Because
yeah in my backyard for sure.
Yeah, because this. One of the things that's happening at the moment is because of the fact of the rental situation. I just saw another article that Jane had shot through, where and it was an interesting comment. As you said, sometimes this is all about grabbing headlines, right? So, but the person had made a statement that it was a single mother with 2 children, and she'd been renting for a period of time, and she's added it all up, and she's paid in excess of $500,000 in rent. And that, you go, oh, shit, that sounds like a lot of money, but go and pull it apart and you go, well, if we're all spending, 20 to 30 grand a year in rent, and you've been there, 10 or 15 years, well, yeah, of course, you're $300,000 to $500,000 before you sniff, So, but obviously with that, you're having all this situation where people are starting to rent together and just jamming together, and some councils are trying to promote granny flats and that sort of stuff. And I can understand. And then you have social housing, which we're not fixing the social issues. We're just fixing the housing. And they're far from social. Most stuff we see occurring with, some, issues that are, whether it be drugs or alcohol or, fights or whatever is in some of these places, which we don't have to hide or run from. Whereas, so anyone who hears anything similar to that occurring would be nervous, and that's why we can understand in regional areas people are going to be
not in my backyard response.
Yeah. But once you understand that in actual fact, what we're trying to provide is long-term stable living conditions, homes for people who are contributing to their community but can't easily fit into that community. E.g., all of the care workers, all of the doctors and nurses who...
You want medical staff for your local hospital.
Yes.
Why wouldn't you encourage them to live in your community?
Correct. And the people who are also just community workers. There's people out there who are looking after the elderly and looking after all these situations. Moving to a small town, to get settled and all those things, to be the local teacher or the local nurse or whatever. That all comes with one big thing. I think we were talking about one of the, regional councils was trying to hire a CEO, but didn't even have anywhere for them to live. They were living in the pool facility building for quite some period of time.
In the infrastructure within the local public pool area. Yeah, they've got a shower and somewhere to have a swim.
Yeah, it's got a nice pool. Got to get your own 50 meter pool. All right. You just have to share it with 50 other people on the weekend.
That's it.
So, so I can understand that. But once you understand that, hey, this project is something different to that, and it is actually providing a genuine community building component to it, it's not only not in my backyard, it might be getting to the point of going, oh, yeah, this is actually completely enriching for the community. And if that household puts out their intent, which we see as a part of this process, that might be growing some more vegetables in the area, or helping other people who need work with small motors, or joining the local Rotary together so we can hopefully help others as well, or whatever might be the case. That all forms part of something that's valuable for the greater community. So
and some of us have very obvious groups, tribe intentions. The military wear a uniform, and it's quite clearly 5 of them turning up in their camouflage gear. They're some sort of defense group of people, and it's really apparent just from a visual quick snapshot. But each of us also have purpose and groups and tribes that aren't so evident. And a collection of nurses, when they're outside of uniform, going about their needs, aren't clearly identified, but you absolutely want them in your community.
Yeah.
So that is a really good positive out of these sort of projects. We have more projects sort of coming along with that intention, and the first one in Malanda was intended to be older women at risk of homelessness. That's sort of the people who they're going to be lost to the community, who are, quite likely, they're pretty awesome people, the ones that we've spoken to in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Caring, sharing, nurturing, the village to raise the child kind of people that you want. So Malanda will be richer for their inclusion and continued ability to be part of their community.
Yes.
I mean, that will be a huge benefit for that community. In our next group forming that is sort of kicking along, they're talking about the ability for healthy homes.
Mm.
And for a large part of our community, once we get past the access to housing, is it enhancing your health? Is it actually contributing, or at least not exacerbating your existing health issues?
Yes.
Is there something more you can tell us about that
Yeah, I mean,
circumstance?
without jumping into the micro details, certainly the idea of someone who's an expert in that area going, okay, well, once I have a look at these issues, you realize there is no one out there looking at healthy housing as a way, almost as, and if it was extended beyond respite to say, well, this is a place where I could live and it's affordable to live. I think one of the things out there is, there's no doubt that, the wealthy people of the world, if you have if you're chemically sensitive or you have some health issues related to environment, you have a really high levels of flexibility to go, well, I'm going to move here and I'm going to do this and I'm going to look after myself. The reality of it is,
they seem to move to New Zealand. I understand that the billionaires who have health issues just gravitate to New Zealand because that's the cleanest. And again, for very simplistic reasons, right? They're not doing it because they've researched the whole thing. They're just going, the easiest answer is clean air and open spaces, New Zealand.
Okay. Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? And we now know also that, as far as one of those biologicals which can cause a hell of a lot of issues being mold, I would imagine New Zealand's probably not exactly the best location for that, being
fairly
having
damp
high
for a
level
lot of the year.
definitely, and cold, so it probably doesn't have the ability for that to dry out and never get fully dry during that period of time. So, but yeah, I mean that's obviously one of those snap reactions, but people have the ability to do that. Whereas the reality of it is, once you're in a social situation where you don't have complete control over everything, well, then ultimately you just have to go with the whim of whatever you get, right? And I would imagine someone who's got, chronically sick, it's not like they're out there getting the highest paid jobs, are they? You're not going to say to someone, oh, whenever you feel a bit sick, just, go and lay down in the corner and we'll make sure we've got an environment that isn't making you sicker, e.g., no fragrances, it's outside so you can have good ventilation, we're not recirculating it. The chances of that are incredibly remote. So, these projects are looking at, can we find a healthy house and can we then allow it maybe to be, accessible for more than one person, which is another way to apply our toolbox, right? So one of the things that we're realizing is that once you get to this idea, and we've certainly moved away from this conversation around sharing, because it isn't about sharing, it's about amplifying your ability to purchase. If you can't afford it by yourself, then the next option is to go, well, how do I amplify what I can afford with others so that I can actually get into something that I want to get into?
And while still retaining my individual, minimum viable product, or whatever however you want to phrase that. I want my own bedroom. Well, that's a reasonable thing. You have your own bedroom.
Yes.
And each 100%. Of us get it's funny how many times we have conversations and we all come back to the same basic criteria. We are human and it's not that complex. Yet when we don't talk about the humans, it gets horribly complex with funding models and return on equity, and this economic model. We've just made it unnecessarily complicated story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which fundamentally is restricting housing for far too many people.
100%. But once we understand that you can get your head around that, and we really do see that, part of the first lot of workshops and I suppose the realizations that when you start thinking about this concept is that in reality, it needs to start with you becoming comfortable with those things. And and we now fully understand after having lots of those conversations that we know there's some baseline human needs that need to be met. And assuming that they're not there is just not how the world works. But once you get past that, then you can go, well, hang on, there's lots of ways this concept can be applied. They can be aging in place. They can be, they can be young people trying to get a start. They can be all of these different plays. They can be people looking for healthy houses or whatever might be the case.
Elders wanting to return to country. Exactly. There's
Correct.
Any which way you want to.
And I think it would be work. One of the episodes we haven't really talked about is discussing or breaking apart this idea of sharing and not sharing and what that means as a part of this journey or process. So the healthy house options, I think we do know a couple of things is generally most people who are going to look at looking for a healthy home, generally the location of that home is actually going to be super important. So one of the things we're hoping to develop out of this concept is also some metrics to be able to go, okay, well, these are things that should be checked off. If you don't, you're probably going to run into some, issues with essentially having some challenges down the track. If you go and put it next door to an asbestos plant, probably not the best location for a healthy house. Then we know that
Tasmania is in a valley that constantly has really high background smoke from household wood fires. So that triggers a lot of asthmatics who live in that area as their background.
Yeah, exactly. And for some people that goes as far as where's the and there'll be lots of conspiracy theory feelings about this, but having any electrical devices like 3G towers or 5G towers or whatever in your area, whether you go as far as saying it's going to turn us all into lizards, or you just go, hang on, I can acknowledge that's, if I didn't have to have that in my backyard, I wouldn't want to. And I think it's interesting now when you think about this. I remember when high powered electricity lines were starting to be pushed around Australia, and there was a lot of people who became uncomfortable with the idea of having that massive buzzing in their backyard. And there was all these people who could hold up a fluorescent tube and it would basically start to light up because of the electricity off it. It's interesting that we don't have the same concern with wireless towers. And I only just thought about that when we're talking, because I can remember, people said, I wouldn't live here because of the high voltage lines that are in the area. Why is it we've become so blasé with telecommunications? Is it just because we could hear the other one?
Maybe it's as simple as that, because when you stand next to those towers, the 30,000 volts, and you can hear them crackling over your head, it gives you a sense that there's something there. And the space doesn't feel great. And if you put a fluoro tube, as you said, that demonstration that you've seen an old cracker say, watch this, and hold it, the further he holds it up, the brighter the thing glows. You go, oh, there's got to be something in that. So
it's interesting that so the other stuff could be, isn't that interesting? Like, because we can have an actual sensation or a knowledge of that electricity passing through there and that potentially causing an issue. That's okay for us to be concerned about, and I just wouldn't, not in my backyard. But interestingly enough, a 5G tower, which is, you can see by the size of the antenna out the top of it, it's pushing out serious amounts of something, right? You don't need a tower that big to push out nothing. So that's something that's maybe worth having a think about as well. But so we know
it's been around for 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's not like anyone's held whatever the metric is. So has anyone taken their goldfish bowl past the 5G tower and noticed that the goldfish does backflips? No, I don't know what the metric is, but much like the holding a fluoro tube up and actually seeing it respond, there must be something, but we just haven't triggered it yet, or it's not widely, it's not discussed as urban myth or otherwise widely enough yet. So I think in time we'll get there, but at what cost?
Definitely. So one of those things is trying to tick off all of those things with the environment in that area to say the localized site-specific stuff says this is going to give me a chance of having a healthy house. Then you got the physical built form itself. Is the one that's already there giving you, does it have high levels of mold? Is it off-gassing chemicals? Is it have some other issue with it? And then there's the area specific stuff, as you talked about, Launceston has this, or, is this heavily radiated by something else? There's some areas in Townsville where they were near where the military bases are, and there's high levels of PFAS, which has affected that area. So, and there's, some, civil suits and a few other things like that happening with some of those things. So we're looking at, could we look at somewhere where those matrix make sense, and you can go, okay, well, this makes sense to have a tiny house in a healthy house in this area. And surprisingly enough, Townsville's climate is actually very well suited to finding healthy housing, because the dry tropics is somewhat conducive to the best of the best. You're talking about people going to New Zealand. Well, one of the beauties of Townsville is the fact that it's generally quite dry, which is obviously going to not provide a culture or a place where organisms can grow easily. And being hot, we know that certainly off-gassing and a few of those elements are reduced by having lots of heat. So I think that's why this project here makes a lot of sense. And I think it'd be good to have another concept moving forward, which, although is completely different from the conversation around what's happening up in Atherton, it's certainly worth having other applications for the same concept occurring at the same time. And actually, I'm going to get the pen and paper out there, because there's a couple of things that I think would be definitely worth discussing. As we've stumbled across those things, having a talk about them, so, the power lines for sure.
Yep. And I guess, interestingly, in our healthy homes sort of work, we've found that there might be triggers that trip people over that might be a bit different to start with. But once you start to be degraded health and you have a level of sensitivity to one thing, it seems that all the other environmental factors can trip you up further. So you might, and what I mean by that is you might start off being responsive to mold. You live in a wet tropics environment and there's lots of mold around. But once you get to the point that your body system can't cope with it easily, you then become sensitive to almost everything. So maybe you start get tripped up by your Wi-Fi signal, or your volatile organic compounds that you didn't notice furniture in the past, but now new furniture and new clothing is really tripping you up because you've got that higher level of sensitivity. So it's not a great situation to be in, because we've got no evidence that anyone's been able to undo it.
Yes.
About being able to manage it and mitigate it. So I moved to a cleaner or a drier environment for less mold, but they've not actually been able to gain back their body's resilience. So it seems to be once you've compromised it, that's been done in a permanent way.
Yep, 100%.
So we've got some more bits to talk about as well. We've had a few interesting conversations coming up about government conversation. So we've always tried to speak to all levels of government to say, hey, from local council to state and to federal. And that seems to be gaining a bit more interest, as well as some corporate conversations. It's there's certainly a desire to have a talk about healthy home. Sorry, not necessarily just healthy, but the people, purpose, place projects. How do we do them? How do we do them for government? How do we do them in a corporate way?
Yes.
What do you put this down to a particular thing? Is it just we've badgered people long enough that they finally return the call, or
I think the scale of all of these problems, and I'd love to have a chat in the next couple of weeks, because obviously we're keen to release this idea of interviews with a aged care insider. So yeah. I think that will be a very interesting conversation for another day. But I also think like the scale of these things has now got to a point where they're beyond traditional solutions. So government has been seen to, here's card number 1, here's card number 2, here's card number 7,562, here's 55 million over here, here's 25 million over there, here's a $2 billion, but nothing is actually happening. So I think the government conversation is coming from the fact that there is no doubt, they're widening what they would consider as traditional ways of doing things. And
the cards we've played aren't getting us any result now.
100%. Corporate, I think they, at a facetious level, the corporates have this situation where they have also seen that with the pressures and stresses of life, and it's interesting, I think you put that, you sent me this one this morning about, Australia is up there as far as being one of the happiest nations in the world. That's interesting, the difference between the correlation between happiness and some of the highest levels of mental depression in the world. So there's some polarities and stuff there, and certainly using, I'm just looking at some stuff on some Bayesian logic there. You'd have to work through why those two things can be possible in the same instance.
Same place.
And I think there is something to be said with humans have this stasis where they normally don't go one end of the scale. I think there's a psychological understanding that we fall back to the middle with happiness. So if you go through a catastrophic event, you'll return normally to the middle. And this idea is I'm going to go on holidays, so I'm going to find this 10 event where I'm super happy. The reality of that is, 5 margaritas and 3 Bacardis is a momental thing, right? You return back to where you were, right? There's this. So happiness is probably different to your mental well-being, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's something to be said for that. But I also think the corporates are also seeing, hey, two parts of this is the human part is just important for everyone in general. If you're in business, how do I find better people? And I think, I don't know, for me, there feels like there's something going on, like pressure is building inside of a whole of our society. And we thought that a year ago, and we thought that 2 years before we had COVID, but it actually feels more tangibly real now. So I think that's starting to flow through. And the second part of the corporate's interest, I honestly think, is the fact that they realize if people don't have a place to live, it's pretty hard to get them to work efficiently. A bit concerned about living out of the back of your car. And I think I posted on Facebook on Saturday that I went to pick up tiles where you told me they were there and they weren't there. No, they weren't. That's another story.
That's the only time I lead you astray.
It was the only time that day you led me astray. But I, turned around and there's a guy who's just hopped out of his car. That's where he's living. So, okay, reality check. I've been mucking around for half an hour or whatever. Like, seriously, slap yourself upside the head. This is really not big issues. So yeah, I mean, there's some hopefully those expanding conversations with the government, and I've got a couple to go back to, and the corporate, and I know you've also been doing a little bit of research into the crowdfunding side of things. So you want to just expound on that a little bit to see if there is, because one of the things we have is, as you said, you can get a 30-year fixed loan in America. There's no such thing like that here.
Yeah,
So what
doesn't exist.
are the other options that are out there? So how could that fit in, do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I touched on earlier that I'm trying to spend less time on the social media, but I think some of that networking of large masses of the public, right, the great public, has seen some really good benefits. So the event of GoFundMe crowdfunding kind of model of doing business has said that has demonstrated that the powers in lots of little individual donations of $1, and grandma opens a purse and can afford $5, and that ultimately adds up to sufficient to make meaningful projects happen. We've had some experience with a hospital, a bat hospital up in the Atherton Tablelands. So cute and furry, and we'd like to donate for visually appealing things. So the Bat Hospital gets this funding to $10,000 or $20,000. It was a substantial amount of money, which is all good. Like that's excellent. But it was never going to come from a government department for this, or a corporate who's not based in Malanda, right? It's a very small community.
Yes.
So I think that's a really positive outcome. And perhaps we're moving away from the koala suit and the tin rattling out the front of the supermarket, and this is the next evolution of that, where people join forces together and say, we can do some greater good and some great projects. Maybe we need to be presenting the meaningful. The catch still seems to be that instant hook. So the guy in the koala suit at the front of the Woolies is pretty compelling. 7 foot tall, big koala rattling a tin. It's attracting noise, making some movement. I like koalas. Here's my loose change.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've pondered that one of the we're struggling to be able to find a human enough message that people want to invest in this catastrophic issue, which is that we know that if you don't have a good sense of your understanding of where you're going to live and where you're going to reside and where your shelter is, that the whole lot of your mental well-being and your well-being in general just catastrophically falls apart. And we know that's a really super important human story, but it's extremely difficult to get people to support it. But you do, and I agree with you. All power to the raising money for the Bat Hospital. But why is it that is raised in 3 weeks, and yet we can't get anyone to want to support the idea of the fact that our elders are being locked away, literally locked away, and are now at a point where there's a large percentage of them in those locked away facilities wanting to kill themselves because the conditions and their disconnection from all of the things that are important to them are so powerful that they don't want to be on any planet, never alone the planet that has an aged care facility. It's an incredible thing.
That might be a really compelling reason that all governments have been so struck, challenged, awkward around the whole voluntary euthanasia ruling, because if it turns out that it gets passed and we have a substantial percentage of these in our care institutions, how does that reflect on our care that we're providing?
Yeah, and I think we'll have to unpack that in another. Actually, this has been a really good conversation because we don't realize we had all these other things to discuss that were in plain view, but it's not until we actually start gasbagging on about with them you can actually isolate them out, because I really do think we need to dive deeper into that and find ways that we can humanize the story of our elders because it shouldn't be called a care facility. If you have, between 50 people, you have 1.5 carers for 12 hours of the day. Well, that's not actually care. And as one of our insiders said, the idea of having 3 meals a day is not a life.
No,
that's not a life. That's just existence. And these are real people who have done a lot for our country and our society, who now are not even having what we could class as an existence. So we don't go 2 hours. I wrote a couple of extra things there just in regards to, obviously we're very keen to get our workshops out and about, and we might come back and discuss that at some stage. But I also think we've continued to learn from each other, have conversations and engage with other people and stumble across things where we go, okay, well, why this all makes so much sense. Why aren't you idiots just doing it, right? And then when you scratch off the surface, you go, oh, this is really quite complex, right? There's some ingrained capabilities in there, some societal things. There's culture, our culture that we live in, and I really love Gabor Mate's idea that when you think about the original idea of a culture, it is essentially to grow something in. So scientific culture means you have this solution, these environment, these conditions, which allow you to grow something and flourish and have all those sorts of things. Whereas, so if it was to be said that our current culture, the place we live in, is supposed to be a place that humans can thrive and be the best versions of themselves, he would say under any stretch of anyone's imagination, it would be a toxic culture. And I think that is a very powerful, easy way, and he's extremely good at breaking down those stories so that the rest of us can understand how intelligent he is. But it's a very good way for us to really go, well, now that we know this, why are these concepts becoming so difficult for people to embrace? And certainly, we've worked or moved away from the idea of saying, hey, this is about sharing, because the reality of it is we're not asking you. The word share has all of these, and you so beautifully explained it when we were talking about, when I said to you, what's the last thing that you can remember you being asked to share, to do? And I think, how did you respond to that about, some of your first understandings of sharing?
Yeah, my first impression of sharing was my mother trying to educate me in the sandpit with my younger sibling to share my green and yellow tractor. And I don't know if you're familiar with the John Deere brand. They're a very sexy tractor.
Exactly.
And I was just not inclined to share with my brother.
No.
And it struck me as a really negative, because for me, I was feeling that I'm having less time with this tractor, this beautiful, amazing piece of machinery. And Mum didn't have the time, or I didn't have the capability to explain, you'll have a far greater game of playing with your brother and including him with your sexy John Deere tractor.
Yeah.
So I just perceived it as this less thing. I was going to have less as my tractor, and that's bloody sawn off and unreasonable. So at 4, that was my level.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a way to understand it, and like, it's interesting. We talk about now, some of the stuff we're studying is around this whole idea that we all on some level are traumatized, and that would seem quite a low level of trauma. Like, it would have been a massive trauma as a 4-year-old. Like, seriously, dude. Like, do you know how cool this John Deere is? Can I whack him over the head with it, because he might not be so inclined to want to play with it? Mum, you just go over there. We'll sort this out. But that does leave a residual understanding. So we've drawn from that, the word in Old English is actually to share, not to share. So the idea is actually a division being broken up or divided into, and that's exactly your understanding of sharing at that moment, right?
Yep.
Whereas it turns out later on that, or actually later on, 1,000 years beforehand,
Mm.
Aristotle says, he came up with this, which has been actually misquoted horribly, but, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's where you were trying to get to with, hey, if we both use this, we can actually have more fun because we can fill up more buckets of sand together and we can carry them from one side to the other. And I get to interact with you, the human, and that would have been fun. And you would have seen that, whatever. So,
So the whole collaboration would have been a much better outcome than just a sharing of time with this device.
Absolutely. And in actual fact, when he originally wrote the original term of, the sum of its parts, he didn't use the word sum because the word sum indicates it's a mathematical equation. So it's actually, he actually used the word besides. So the whole is something besides of the parts. So he was trying to say it's more than, without using the word sum. And of course, with our modern thinking, we've used the word sum, which is actually a breakdown of what Aristotle was trying to say. It's something beside the sum of the parts being made up. It's more than it was, without using our terminology to expand on that. So I think we've understood that that we need to move away from that term and need to understand this is about a group of people magnifying their buying capacity, because 1 times 0 is still 0, but 5 times 0 is still 0. But if you all are contributing a little bit, then you have something more than one. So if you have 5 by, we can only afford a quarter of a home, 5 by a quarterist, we've actually got more than one between us. Like where before we had no opportunity to do anything. And this is something, while I'm talking about this, is maybe something we should actually look at adding to our workshop as the initial workshop conversation, because I think that's a very important understanding that, hey, this is not a division. This is actually an advancement. So many levels, not only just the physical bits, but the human communication and that sort of stuff. And that's where we've been also messing around with this idea that of a holarchy, which obviously everyone knows what a hierarchy is, which is, I got to be the top of the castle, whatever. This whole idea of a holarchy, which is if we can give you the conditions which make it possible for you to be the best version of you, but never feel like we're in this constant battle of I've got to have more than you or less than you or put you down. Let's just say, hey, we're trying to produce a holarchy, which, you have agreements and systems and mechanisms that help you get to the point where you can be the best version of yourself. So I think that is a good catch up, because that's probably some areas where you go, yeah, absolutely. These were things that we need to change our conversation with, so that others can more readily embrace the idea of people, purpose, place, without necessarily feeling like, hey, this is something that's taking away from me in this journey, because the whole of society is about me and have.
And if it happens you're wandering around with the ability to access 1/4 of a house, that's about as useful as an ashtray on a motorbike. Like, it really is not helping you solve and so you have all this housing insecurity. But if you are able to combine forces with a collection of people, with some of that same level of capacity, so otherwise all 5 of us would be wandering around with an ashtray for our motorbike, which is not really helping any of us. We combine forces. We're actually looking at more than the requirement for a single house. We've now got some potential to, and this I think is fundamental to the thinking too, is instead of just looking for a minimum viable one house,
I agree,
you have capacity in excess of that. You can actually select a better practice house, which might mean modification, adaptation for your specific set of circumstances. So it is a home to suit you. So it's not just the minimum viable thing picked up off the shelf. it is actually a thing adapted to suit your group.
Yes. And also
me,
best practice, like we've been talking about forever, what could housing look like if it had the capacity? And it's very difficult for an individual to go and justify, any of these best practice options. Whereas as a group of people, you can go, well, yeah, of course, if we all find a way to make our electricity better, well, we're all going to benefit for you. And I like that you used, and I've written that down, combining forces.
Yeah.
That's a better way to explain it rather than, dividing and sharing, where literally you're combining forces. And those examples you talked about, and it's funny, you come up with ashtray on a motorbike, and I think I got from my childhood tits on a ball pig. I don't know where that comes from.
I'm trying to keep it family sensitive.
We go straight to jail now. And I mean, probably that's been some really good chat about that, and I think we actually need to have a specific podcast about that. Trying to find out what people's experiences have been about sharing, and this is a different from that. The other thing that which I think we're pretty close to the end anyway, but on top of developing the concepts around the holarchy with this idea of coming together, is the fact that there could be tools to help you get there. And I've experienced a couple of tools in the last period of time, which I through the Alethea coaching style. So I did some inspirational breath work with Nicola Price, who's in over in the UK at 2:30 in the morning. But it was it definitely 100%. It definitely 100%. And I can probably put the links in later on for Nicola's website to go and check out. But inspirational breathing is certainly something that it was. So I think doing it as a group is a very, very powerful tool, and it's not so mystic as it maybe once was. And Michael, who's also in the group that I'm involved with through the Alethea coaching, he's also starting some circling, which is really a method of becoming connected to other people, and I've found it really quite a powerful process. So this idea of the core of circling is that a person within the group essentially talks about something that's happening in their existing world, and the other people follow a set pattern of being engaged with that person and being, I suppose, connected. Which is one of the things we talk about being so unconnected. I can see that circling could be a method which just helps people become connected as a group, and it has a couple of core areas being honoring each other's dignity and care and respect, and privacy and confidentiality, communicating with the intention to relate, which we fully agree with, and listening to each other's humanity. So obviously that's not about you providing advice, it's about listening to their humanity. So really powerful tools, and I'll also put some links there eventually. We can probably put them up there to those sites for people who are interested in trying to find some other human tools that might just help them in whatever they're doing. We've found all of these things to be, whether they're the system behind the collaborative operating system or whatever, they certainly there's certainly some really powerful tools in there for sure.
Yep. Awesome. Well, it's hopefully we've given you some update on where we're at today. The larger part of what we've been talking about has really been human progression. From a couple of old white guys who are doing the best with our modest abilities.
Late bloomers or something.
Yeah, that's it. But it's worth sharing, because I think if you can openly accept that we're far from the perfect creature and we're still able to learn and evolve, that's a good starting point. If you're not willing to change your thinking or evolve your thinking, then perhaps this isn't the place for you. But people, purpose, place, absolutely have to go. guide and talk you through a housing outcome that works as a home rather than just the bricks and mortar conversation.
Absolutely. And it's been really good. Like we were going, okay, we need to have one of these chats today, but as we've continued to waltz through the content, there's been some really poignant moments there that also give us some I suppose a bit of a pep in the step to say we're still continuing this journey, we're still working through the components, and we're still learning and being able to use that learning to genuinely improve people's journeys down the track. So that's very cool, and I appreciate doing it with you.
Mate, I appreciate, as always, time in your company and with your joining us on this journey, because it's I jump out of bed in the morning feeling alive and that I'm doing something meaningful. My mum still thinks I'm nuts. She might be right.
Yeah. There's a few songs about that, isn't there?
That's it.
Awesome.
Mate, thank you very much. We might sign off about there. Seems to be a natural fit, and join in again next week. Hopefully we'll have a guest along. We've got a few people in the wings, so whether it's a pre-record or a live guest, that's the intention for next week. So awesome. This is episode 42.
Yes.
Done and dusted. Bit of an update.
Yep.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you. Speak
See you next week.
Look forward to seeing Christine when she's up to it too. See you, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. She adds a bit of spark and flair to a couple of
probably a bit of intelligence, if the truth be said.
That's it.
See you later.
Have a good day. Bye.